A fishing boat, sitting upright in a desert. No water anywhere, no coast, no river, no lake, just sand and salt in every direction, and a rusting ship the size of a house, exactly where somebody last moored it. It has not moved in 40 years. The sea did. There are places on this planet that do not look like they can be real. Photographs of them get shared for years with people insisting they must be fake. They are not. Every one of them is a real place, where real people lived, right up until the moment something they depended on completely disappeared. A Soviet town frozen in the Arctic, with the piano still in the concert hall. A village so completely swallowed by green that you cannot find the windows. A capital city buried under its own volcano. A hillside of 300 empty houses, emptied by a signature on a treaty. And a fleet of ships stranded in a desert, because a sea the size of a country simply vanished. These are 5 places that shouldn't exist. Counting down, from 5 to 1. We begin about 1,000 kilometers from the North Pole, on the Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, in a landscape of glaciers and bare rock, there is a Soviet town. Not a Soviet-style town, an actual one, built by the USSR, on Norwegian soil, and abandoned so suddenly that almost everything was left where it stood. Norway sold the site to a Soviet state mining company in the 1920s, and the coal underneath it turned Pyramiden into something the Soviet Union was very proud of. It was built to be a showpiece, proof of what socialism could do at the top of the world. Over 1,000 people lived here. There was a swimming pool, a sports hall, a library, a hospital. Grass was shipped in from the mainland so that children could play on something green in a place where nothing grows. And they went to remarkable lengths to make it livable. Soil is said to have been shipped up from the mainland so there could be lawns, and the settlement is reported to have kept a heated greenhouse and livestock indoors, so that people this far north could have fresh food and fresh milk. Everything a family needed sat inside a handful of buildings, connected against the weather. For the people who grew up here, Pyramiden was not a mining camp in the Arctic. It was a small, complete, surprisingly comfortable world, and it was built to last. And then the coal stopped being worth digging. In 1998, the company shut the mine, and the town was evacuated over a matter of months. What makes Pyramiden extraordinary is what happened next, or rather, what didn't. Up here it is so cold and so dry that almost nothing rots. There is no vegetation to grow over anything. Buildings that would have collapsed within decades in any normal climate are expected to stand, recognizably, for centuries. Inside the culture house, the grand piano is still on the stage. It is, by some accounts, the northernmost grand piano on Earth. Our 4th place had exactly the opposite problem. Nature did not leave it alone at all. 60 kilometers off the coast of Shanghai, on a steep island hillside, there is a village where you cannot see a single wall. Not because the buildings have collapsed, they haven't. They are all still there, 3 stories tall, with their roof tiles intact. You cannot see them because every surface, on every house, is completely covered in green. Hotuan was built in the 1950s, and it was not a poor place. At its height in the 1980s, more than 2,000 people lived here in around 500 houses. Solid, multi-story homes with courtyards and balconies looking out over the harbor, built from materials hauled up those slopes by hand. Locally, it was nicknamed Little Taiwan, because compared to the other island villages, it was wealthy. And then the fishing industry outgrew it. The bay was shallow and exposed, and the new, bigger trawlers simply could not dock there. Fish stocks were thinning at the same time. So the men had to work out of ports on the other side of the island, and eventually, it made no sense to keep a home in a village their boats could not reach. Families left through the 1990s. By 1994, only a handful remained. By the early 2000s, officially, nobody. And the name of the place is almost too neat. Hotuan means roughly, Back Bay, the village behind the headland, the one facing away. Which is exactly what it became, a place the world turned its back on the far side of an island, out of sight. Former residents do come back. There are people in their 20s and 30s now who were carried out of here as small children, who climb down the overgrown paths to look at the houses their grandparents built, and pick plants in gardens that have not been gardens for 30 years. What happened next took about 20 years. With nobody cutting anything back, the island's vines simply climbed. They went up the walls, over the roofs, through the windows, and across the roads, until the entire village disappeared under a single, unbroken layer of leaves. Inside some of those houses, the furniture is still there. From a distance now, Hotuwan does not read as a village at all. It reads as a green hillside with a strange geometry to it. Our third place also vanished under something. But it took 4 years, not 20, and it came from underneath. In the Caribbean, on the island of Montserrat, there is a capital city that nobody is allowed to enter. Its streets are still laid out. Its buildings are still standing, the ones that are still visible. Because most of Plymouth is under several meters of volcanic ash, and has been since the 1990s. Plymouth was the administrative and commercial heart of the island, the port, the government, the shops, home to a few thousand people. Behind it stood the Soufriere Hills, a volcano that had been quiet for centuries, long enough that a capital city had been built directly in its path. It woke up in July 1995. The town was evacuated as a precaution, and for a while people were allowed back in. Then in 1997 the eruption escalated sharply, and pyroclastic flows, avalanches of superheated gas and rock, came down the mountain. 19 people died. Plymouth was buried under meters of ash and mud, the island's airport was destroyed, and the southern two-thirds of Montserrat was declared an exclusion zone, which it remains. Roughly two-thirds of the island's population left Montserrat altogether, and most never came back. And the island had to build itself a new one. Everything that made Montserrat function was in the south: the capital, the port, the hospital, and the airport, which was buried along with everything else. So a new center had to be constructed from almost nothing on the northern end of the island, with a new airport and a new harbor, for a population less than half the size it had been. An entire country's infrastructure, rebuilt from scratch, because a mountain woke up. And here is the detail that makes Plymouth genuinely unique. It was never officially replaced. On paper, it is still the capital of Montserrat, which makes it the only capital city in the world that is also a ghost town, a seat of government buried under its own mountain with nobody in it. Our second place was not buried, or flooded, or burned. It was emptied by a piece of paper. On a hillside in southwestern Turkey, above a valley of pine and olive trees, stand around 350 stone houses. They have no roofs and no windows, and they are arranged in neat terraced rows up the slope, with staircases and lanes still running between them. Nobody has lived in any of them for over a century. The village was called Levisi, and it was Greek. Greek-speaking Orthodox Christians had lived in this part of Anatolia for centuries, alongside their Turkish-speaking Muslim neighbors. By the early 20th century, Levisi was a substantial town. Houses, chapels, 2 large churches, a school, a fountain dated 1888. Then came the Greco-Turkish War and the Treaty of Lausanne in 1923. Written into that treaty was a compulsory population exchange. Orthodox Christians in Turkey would be sent to Greece, and Muslims in Greece would be sent to Turkey, by agreement between 2 governments. The people of Levisi were among them. They left their houses and their churches and their dead, and they were never permitted to come back. There have been attempts to change that. Over the years, developers have proposed turning the hillside into hotels and holiday villages, and each time, the plans have run into the fact that this is not really an empty site. It is a memorial. It has been given protected status and is presented as a village of friendship and peace between 2 peoples, precisely because of what happened here. So the compromise has been to leave it standing and leave it empty, and let people walk through it. Which means that 100 years on, you can climb the same stone stairs, look through the same doorways, and see the valley exactly as the last family to leave saw it. And nobody ever moved in. The Muslim families who arrived from Greece were farmers, and the land here was rocky and poor, so they largely settled elsewhere. An earthquake in 1957 brought down many of the remaining roofs. So the houses have simply stood there, empty, roofless, in rows, for 100 years. Cahokia lost its people. Our final place lost something far bigger than that. And so, we reach number 1. The ships from the beginning of this video. They sit in the desert outside a town called Moynak in the far west of Uzbekistan. And the reason they are there is not that somebody dragged them inland. They are exactly where they were floating. It is the sea that left. The Aral Sea was, until the 1960s, the fourth largest lake on Earth, 68,000 square kilometers of water, with over 1,000 islands in it. Mohynock was one of its two great fishing ports. Its cannery supplied the entire Soviet Union. At its height, the Aral fishery accounted for something like a sixth of all the fish caught in the USSR, and Mohynock alone provided work for tens of thousands of people. There is a story from 1921 that when famine struck the Volga region, Lenin appealed to the Aral fleet for help, and within days they had sent over 20,000 tons of fish and saved thousands of lives. Then, in the 1960s, Soviet planners made a decision. They diverted the two great rivers that fed the Aral, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, out into the desert to irrigate cotton. It worked, in the narrow sense. Uzbekistan became one of the largest cotton producers in the world, and the sea began to die. Not quickly enough for anyone to panic, and not slowly enough to stop. The shoreline pulled back a little further every year, and the boats followed it, and then eventually, the boats could not follow it anymore. But there is one part of this story that is not over. At the northern end in Kazakhstan, they built a dam, the Kok Aral, finished in 2005 with World Bank funding, to hold what water was left in the smaller northern lobe of the sea. Engineers expected it to take years to fill. It went over the spillway in about 8 months. The North Aral has risen. The salinity has dropped by roughly half. Around 20 fish species have come back, and with them the fishermen and boats that actually float. Aralsk, the northern port, went from having the sea 100 kilometers away to about 25. And it does nothing at all for Mohynock, which sits on the wrong side of it. But it proves something worth saying out loud. This was not a natural disaster. It was a decision. And where a different decision has been made, some of it has come back. Today the water is roughly 150 kilometers from Mohynock, and the Aral is down to a small fraction of what it was. On the exposed seabed, a new desert has formed, the Aral Cum, and the wind lifts the salt and the old agricultural chemicals out of it and drops them on the surrounding towns. The fishing fleet is gone. The population of Mohynock collapsed, and the ships are still out there, sitting on the sand, rusting into a seabed that has not been underwater in a generation. This is not a place that was abandoned by its people. It is a place that was abandoned by the sea. 5 places that look impossible. And look at what actually happened in each one. Pyramiden lost its coal. Hotuwan lost its harbor. Plymouth lost the mountain it was built beneath. Cahokia lost its people by treaty. And Mohynock lost an entire sea. Every one of these places was built around one thing, and every one of them outlived that thing by decades. That is what you are actually looking at in these photographs. Not ruins, leftovers, the parts that carried on standing after the reason for them had gone. But I want to hear from you. Of these 5, which one would you get on a plane to see? And which one, honestly, do you think will still be standing in 200 years? Tell me down in the comments. I read them. And if you want the story of 5 towns that went the other way, drowned on purpose underwater, we've told that story in its own episode and you'll find it on screen now. Next time, another place the world left behind. Stay with us.